What if Anakin had visions of himself burning on Mustafar? How would that change things? Let's find out. So, in this timeline, Anakin would still get visions of Padmé dying in childbirth, but later, after Obi-Wan leaves Utapau, Anakin would get a different vision when he's at Padmé's apartment. In the original timeline, Anakin got a vision of Padmé and Obi-Wan at this point. But here, instead of seeing Obi-Wan by Padmé's side, Anakin would see something else entirely. Let's go over it. Anakin sat in Padmé's apartment, his fingers tapping rhythmically on a datapad as he monitored the siege of Mandalore, where his former apprentice Ahsoka had gone to capture Darth Maul. The room he was in was bathed in the bright midday sun, rays streaming through the windows casting warm, golden light on the sleek furniture. The cityscape outside shimmered under the clear blue sky. The sounds of Coruscant's bustling life faintly reaching Anakin's ears. But suddenly, an overwhelming sensation gripped Anakin. His vision blurred, and the datapad slipped from his hands, clattering onto the floor. An intense heat enveloped him, and his surroundings melted away, replaced by a nightmarish scene. In this vision, Anakin found himself staring at a sky filled with ash and smoke. He then lowered his gaze, and his eyes met the cracked and molten ground beneath him, the heat from it almost unbearable. The air was thick with the smell of burning, making it difficult to breathe. "You were the chosen one. It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it to darkness." The familiar voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi echoed from behind where Anakin stood. And having heard this, Anakin turned around and saw a scene that made his blood run cold. He saw himself, a different version, withering on the ground, dismembered and struggling. Horror seized Anakin as he saw this, as he realized he was witnessing his own potential future. Above this dismembered version of himself, on higher ground, stood Obi-Wan, his expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. Anakin could feel his vocal cords strain as his other self, the Fallen One, screamed the following at Obi-Wan. "I hate you." The words were a raw, visceral cry that tore through the inferno. Obi-Wan's voice, filled with agony, replied to this. "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you," Obi-Wan said. The pain in Obi-Wan's eyes was a mirror to the torment felt by the fallen figure, or so Anakin felt. And at that moment, as the words left Obi-Wan's mouth, flames erupted around the dismembered Anakin, engulfing him in fire. And then, just as the flames started to swallow him whole, Anakin was pulled out of this vision. He gasped, finding himself back in Padmé's apartment. His body was drenched in sweat, his breath ragged. He stared blankly at the datapad on the floor, its screen still flickering with updates from Mandalore. The room, now appearing overly bright and almost too warm, felt oppressive under the noonday sun. Padmé then walked in, concern rested on her face as she saw the state Anakin was in. "Anakin, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing his disoriented state and the datapad lying on the floor. Anakin quickly composed himself, not wanting to alarm her. "I received an update from Mandalore," he said. "I need to go to the temple to address it." Padmé's eyes widened with immediate concern. "Is Ahsoka okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Anakin nodded quickly as he got up, trying to reassure her. "Yes, she's fine, Padmé, but there's something I need to handle personally at the temple." Padmé studied Anakin's demeanor, sensing there were more he wasn't saying. "Are you sure that's all?" "You look troubled," Padmé said. Anakin forced a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Padmé, it's just some technicalities. I'll be back soon." In response, Padmé nodded slowly, though her eyes reflected her doubts. "Be careful, Anakin," she said. He gave her a brief, strained smile before leaving the apartment. The sunlight seemed harsher now, the bustling sounds of Coruscant more distant and muted. Anakin's thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear and uncertainty as he navigated through the Senate district. The engine of his speeder roared as he sped through the congested traffic, weaving in and out with the reflexes of a seasoned pilot. But Anakin's mind was elsewhere, replaying the new vision over and over in his mind. The image of his burning, dismembered self haunted him, gnawing at his resolve. The Jedi Temple, a symbol of peace and order, seemed a distant sanctuary in the midst of his internal chaos. And that is where he was going. Arriving at the temple, Anakin hurried through the grand halls, passing Jedi and Padawans who greeted him with respect. He barely acknowledged them, his focus resting entirely on reaching his quarters. The cool, tranquil air of the temple did little to calm his racing heart. Finally, he reached his quarters and closed the door behind him. He then took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The room was filled with familiar items, ship models meticulously assembled, pod racing posters, and trinkets from various missions. Normally, these items brought Anakin comfort, a reminder of simpler times and his love for adventure. But now they seemed like relics from a distant past, insignificant compared to the weight of the vision he had just experienced. Anakin then sat down on his bed, his eyes scanning the room without really seeing anything. He needed to think, to make sense of what he had just seen. Why would something like that happen? Anakin thought, trying to unravel the vision's meaning. Why would Obi-Wan do that? He then replayed the scene again in his head. The agony in Obi-Wan's voice as he spoke. You were the chosen one. It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it to darkness. These words echoed in Anakin's mind, each syllable laced with pain and betrayal. And then he realized that Obi-Wan had attacked him because he had joined the Sith. But how? He had no desire to join the Sith, no ambition to fall to the dark side. So how could this have happened, Anakin thought. But the vision was clear. He had turned, and it had led to his destruction at the hands of his own master. But then Anakin's thoughts drifted to Palpatine and the conversation they had about Darth Plagueis. More specifically, Darth Plagueis' ability to keep people from dying using the dark side. Palpatine had said that the dark side offered many unnatural abilities, powers that the Jedi could never grant him. Could it be that in his desperation to save Padmé he had sought out these dark powers? The exact details were a mystery, but this seemed to be the cause of the vision, Anakin figured. But who was this Sith that would lure him to the dark side, Anakin thought? Because only a Sith would have the knowledge on how to save Padmé through these unnatural methods. Anakin wondered if it could be Darth Sidious, who the Jedi had been searching for years. As a side note, the reason why Anakin wouldn't suspect Sidious to be Palpatine is because, while it's not explained in the movie, in the novelization, Palpatine does imply to Anakin that ever since Maul was discovered on Naboo, he, Palpatine, had been researching the Sith. So Anakin knows that when Palpatine speaks of Darth Plagueis, which is why Anakin doesn't think Palpatine is a Sith at that point. And in this alternate timeline, he would still be holding on to that belief, as he wonders who the Sith that will lure him to the dark side would be. Anyways, back to the story. So because of all this confusion, Anakin clenched his fists, frustration and fear gnawing at him. The room around him felt stifling. The familiar items now a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. He then stood up and began pacing, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of his confusion and fear. What was he supposed to do? He considered seeking advice from Yoda again, especially given the gravity of the vision. But he quickly dismissed that thought. Yoda wouldn't be able to help, and beyond that, at this point Yoda was on Kashyyyk. There was no one he could talk to, and there was no one who could help him. Or so Anakin believed. The room grew dimmer as the sun set, casting long shadows that seemed to deepen his sense of despair. Roughly a day later, news arrived that Obi-Wan had engaged General Grievous on Utapau. This piece of information brought a flicker of hope to the Jedi Temple. However, it also set in motion a series of events that would change everything. So soon after news arrived that Obi-Wan had engaged Grievous, Mace Windu summoned Anakin for a meeting. And during this meeting, Mace Windu tasked Anakin with informing Palpatine that Grievous had been found, as Windu believed that Palpatine's reaction to this news would give the Jedi a hint on his true intentions. And Anakin, having received this order from Mace Windu, nodded, his mind still a chaotic whirl. As Anakin made his way to the hangar and exited the temple, the Coruscant evening had begun to settle in, casting a golden glow over the sprawling cityscape. Coruscant always looked beautiful in the evening, and under normal circumstances, Anakin would have taken a moment to appreciate its beauty. But right now, the only thing on Anakin's mind was his own burning form. But beyond that, a different fear had also occupied Anakin's mind by this point. And this fear stemmed from Anakin reasoning that if Obi-Wan kills him, then he wouldn't be able to save Padmé from death, meaning that both him and Padmé would perish. So this made Anakin's mental state a lot worse in this timeline than it did in the original. Arriving at Palpatine's office, Anakin quickly made his way in, his mind still elsewhere. The architecture of the Republic Executive Building, where Palpatine's official residence was located, was usually imposing and awe-inspiring. But without noticing any of this, Anakin entered the Chancellor's opulent office, a room filled with artifacts and treasures from across the galaxy, each piece meticulously placed to convey power and authority. As Anakin walked in, Palpatine turned around without Anakin having to call out to the Chancellor. And then, without wasting much time, Anakin shared the news with Palpatine, telling him that Obi-Wan had engaged General Grievous on Utapau. To this, Palpatine said he hopes that General Kenobi is up to the task. As Anakin noted, Palpatine's reaction was measured, his demeanor controlled. He then spoke of the potential end to the war, and then the conversation shifted, and Palpatine's tone grew darker, more conspiratorial. He spoke of the Jedi's distrust in him, and their fear of Anakin's powers, and then soon enough, the room seemed to close in on Anakin as Palpatine revealed his true identity. The Chancellor was Darth Sidious. Anakin's mind reeled, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe as the weight of the truth settled upon Anakin. For a moment, Anakin felt as if he was being drawn back to the vision he had of him burning. And then, as if by instinct, Anakin ignited his lightsaber and pointed it at Palpatine, its glow illuminating the Sith's face. Palpatine then said many things, and eventually he told Anakin that through him, Anakin will be able to save Padmé. Anakin's heart pounded in his chest. The vision of Padmé, fragile and dying, flashed before his eyes. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his recent vision and the current conversation. "You're saying you can help me save Padmé?" Anakin asked, his voice a mixture of hope and fear. Palpatine's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Yes, Anakin, through me, you can lend the power to prevent her death. The Jedi cannot help you, but I can," Palpatine said. Suddenly, everything fell into place for Anakin. Anakin realized what was most likely going to happen. He was desperate to save Padmé, and he would accept Palpatine's offer, which would eventually lead to Obi-Wan turning on him. And Anakin further summarized that informing the Jedi Council of Palpatine's true identity could trigger the very chain of events leading to his downfall at Obi-Wan's hands. And if that happens, he would most likely die before he could save Padmé through the dark side, Anakin would assume. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't lose Padmé. And so in this timeline, and because of this changing perspective, Anakin makes a different decision. "I won't report you to the council," Anakin said, turning his lightsaber off. "But I need to know how to save Padmé now. Show me." Palpatine's smile widened, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Very well, Anakin. Follow me," he said. Palpatine led Anakin deeper into his office, the grandeur of the space now feeling almost suffocating. The atmosphere was thick with an almost palpable tension. Soon enough, the two reached a smaller, more private office, where a large, ornately carved desk dominated the space. Palpatine took his seat behind it, motioning Anakin to sit in the chair opposite him. The young Jedi complied, his eyes never leaving Palpatine's, a mix of curiosity and apprehension etched on his features. "Anakin," Palpatine began, his tone reassuring. "The tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise is not merely a legend. He was my master. He taught me the ways of the dark side, and the secrets to influencing the very essence of life itself." Anakin's eyes widened, a spark of anger igniting within him. "So you've been manipulating me, using Plagueis' story to lead me down this path?" Anakin asked. Palpatine's expression remained calm, his voice unwavering. "Manipulating? No, Anakin. I have been guiding you, showing you a path to your true potential. I have always had your best interests at heart." Anakin's frustration simmered, but his desperation to save Padmé outweighed his indignation. He took a deep breath, trying to focus. "How did you know about my visions of Padmé? How could you possibly know what I've seen?" A slight smile tugged at the corners of Palpatine's mouth. "You are powerful, Anakin, but I have had more time to train and grow strong in the Force. The dark side offers insights and prescient abilities that only the most powerful Jedi can glimpse. I have seen much of the future. I have also had visions of Senator Amidala screaming in agony as she dies." And this made sense to Anakin. The perceived sincerity in Palpatine's voice and the vividness of his own visions made the Chancellor's words all too believable. The fear and urgency that had driven him to this moment now threatened to overwhelm him. "Just show me how to save Padmé," he demanded. "Very well, Anakin. Let me tell you something about my master, Darth Plagueis. Something he once demonstrated to me. It involved a different Sith named Darth Venemus." The room seemed to darken further as Palpatine began this tale, his voice low and captivating. Darth Venemus was a secret apprentice of Darth Tenebrous, who trained Darth Plagueis. Tenebrous had taught both Plagueis and Venemus in the dark arts, unbeknownst to each other. Anakin leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Palpatine, absorbing every word. "After my master, Plagueis, killed Tenebrous, the details of which I am not aware, Venemus confronted Plagueis on a moon known as Sojourn, a remote world where Plagueis had established a clandestine laboratory. And so one day, Darth Venemus arrived on Sojourn and attacked my master. But he failed and Plagueis was able to easily overpower him." Palpatine then stopped, taking a moment to observe Anakin's interest in the story. "Rather than killing Venemus," Palpatine explained, "Plagueis saw an opportunity. He kept Venemus alive, albeit in a coma, as a subject for his experiments. For years, Venemus remained in this state, his body and midichlorians at the mercy of Plagueis' relentless pursuit of knowledge." Palpatine's gaze was intense, almost hypnotic. Plagueis was obsessed with the manipulation of midichlorians, the very essence of life. His experiments, Anakin, were aimed at unlocking the secrets of life and death. But I did not fully grasp the scope of Plagueis' research until one day Plagueis invited me to sojourn and demonstrated the culmination of his work to me. Anakin, he killed Venomous in front of me, only to bring him back to life using his mastery over the midichlorians. He repeated the process multiple times, each resurrection more refined than the last, until finally he let Venomous die permanently. Anakin's mind was racing, the implications of Palpatine's story sinking in. The image of Venomous, his life force ebbing and flowing at Plagueis' will, was both horrifying and awe-inspiring. So you're saying that through this manipulation, you or I can save Padmé? Palpatine nodded. Yes, Anakin. By learning to control the midichlorians, we can prevent death itself. Only one has achieved this ability before, but together, I am certain we can rediscover it, Palpatine said. Which is similar to what he told Anakin in the original timeline. But in the original timeline, as Anakin heard this, he wasn't really in a state to do much thinking. But here, he is. And because of that, Anakin's mind churned with questions, each one a torrent of confusion and doubt. If you were Darth Plagueis' apprentice, Anakin began slowly, choosing his words with care, why don't you have this ability already? Why do you need me to unlock it? You told me that Plagueis told his apprentice everything you knew. But if that were true, you would have mastered this manipulation of midichlorians yourself. Palpatine's eyes flickered, hearing this, a rare sign of vulnerability in his otherwise composed demeanor. He looked away for a moment, his gaze falling on the statue of Sistros Nevat he kept in his office. Anakin, Palpatine began, his voice lower and more introspective. The Sith have a unique way of passing on knowledge. The rule of two ensures that the apprentice surpasses the master, but also that the master is eventually taken out of the picture. It is a cycle of power and succession. Plagueis was a genius, but he was also a threat, Anakin. I could not allow him to live, knowing he would eventually turn on me, as I would on him. This is the way of the Sith. Anakin kept listening, but still confused as Palpatine continued. Plagueis and I had different roles. My path was the political arena, where I could manipulate the galaxy to our advantage. Plagueis' was in the dark arts, pushing the boundaries of the Force. But in the end, I had to strike before he did. It was a risk I had to take, Anakin. Anakin's mind reeled, the reality of the Sith's brutal nature sinking in. So you killed him before he could teach you everything? Yes, Palpatine admitted. His voice changed with a hint of regret. But I have all this research, Anakin. His notes, his experiments. Together we can unlock the secrets that he discovered. You and I, Anakin, have the potential to surpass him. Anakin glared at Palpatine, searching for any sign of deceit. The office room seemed to pulse with an almost tangible energy, the air thick with the weight of unspoken promises and dark possibilities. You truly believe he can do this? Anakin asked. I do, Palpatine replied, his eyes meeting Anakin's with a steely determination. With your strength and my knowledge, Anakin, we can achieve anything through the Force. Anakin then leaned forward, his desperation mounting. But how? How can we do this in time? I saw Padmé die in childbirth. We do not have years like Plagueis to rediscover this ability. She needs help now. Very soon. Not in years. Hearing this, Palpatine's expression grew more serious, almost regretful. If only the visions had come sooner. We could have started earlier, Anakin. But, despite the time constraints, the work of Plagueis and my own research is our best chance at saving dear Padmé Amidala. However, in the unfortunate scenario that we fail to save her, Palpatine said softly, we could bring her back from death itself. Anakin had snapped back to Palpatine, disbelief written on his face. That's impossible, Anakin said. No one, no matter how powerful, can bring someone back from the dead, Chancellor. Palpatine shook his head. The Jedi have taught you poorly, Anakin, Palpatine replied, his tone both patronizing and instructive. They limit your understanding of the Force. All things are possible through the dark side. Palpatine's eyes gleamed with dark intensity as he began to speak. As an example, Anakin, the ancient Sith Lords were masters of the dark side, wielding powers that the Jedi could never comprehend. They understood the true potential of the Force. Let me tell you about some of them. Darth Nihilus, for instance, was a being of pure hunger. It is said that he could drain the life force of entire planets, leaving them barren and lifeless. His mere presence brought devastation, and his power was so great that it transcended his physical form. Then there was Exar Kun, Palpatine continued, his voice filled with reverence and menace. He mastered the art of dark-side alchemy, creating fearsome creatures and imbuing objects with dark energy. His spirit lingered long after his physical death, corrupting and influencing others from beyond the grave. His power was so immense that he could manipulate the Force to bend reality itself to his will. And let us not forget about Vitiate. He was a Sith Emperor of old, Anakin. He achieved immortality by transferring his essence into countless bodies over millennia. His control over the Force was so absolute that he could dominate the minds of entire populations, bending them to his will. It was said that Vitiate could consume entire civilizations to sustain his life force, an insatiable hunger that knew no bounds. Palpatine then leaned back, his expression shifting to one of sinister assurance. These are but a few feats of the dark side, Anakin. Bringing back someone from death is just as easily possible. Anakin's eyes widened in disbelief. How? He demanded, his voice a mix of hope and skepticism. Palpatine's eyes sharpened. Anakin, there are ways to open a portal into the dark side itself, in places strong with the dark side. These locations are rare, but they exist, nexuses of power where the veil between the living world and the dark side dimension is thin. So quick side note, this dark side dimension actually does exist. In the Vader comics, a Sith Lord by the name of Darth Momin uses such a portal to bring himself back to life. Momin existed in the physical world after his death by possessing his mask, but after using this dark side portal, he was able to bring himself back to life in flesh and blood. But anyways, point is, Palpatine is not lying when he tells Anakin that there is a portal that can bring people back from death. Anyways, back to the story. Anakin was still left confused upon hearing Palpatine speak of this portal. A portal to the dark side? How would that work? He asked. Palpatine's voice lowered, filled with a dark, captivating intensity. Through these portals, one can access the dark side dimension, a realm of immense power and potential. Within this dimension, the boundaries of life and death blur. The dark side holds the essence of all those who have perished, their energy lingering in the shadows. By harnessing the dark energies at such a nexus, Palpatine continued, one can draw upon the essence of the departed, pulling them back into the realm of the living. It requires immense concentration and a deep connection to the dark side, but it can be done, Anakin. Anakin's breath quickened, the vision of Padmé's death now overshadowed by the tantalizing possibility of her resurrection. And you can teach me this? Anakin asked. Yes, Anakin, I can teach you. It will take time, but through our combined efforts, we can indeed find a path to accessing this portal. Your potential in the Force is quite possibly beyond that of Darth Vitiate, Anakin. We can accomplish this. There are places I know that could enable this portal to be opened, locations strong with the dark side energy, and I assure you we can use this knowledge to save Padmé. Anakin seemed contemplative, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts, and Palpatine, observing Anakin's contemplative nature, seized the moment. The Jedi, he said slowly, keep many secrets hidden in their archives. This knowledge could significantly help us, but they will not allow us to access it, Anakin, let alone use it for such purposes. Anakin's head again snapped up, a flicker of fear and realization closing his features. The vision of Obi-Wan, his mentor and friend, leaving him to burn to death, loomed large in Anakin's mind. Palpatine continued, his voice smooth and persuasive. The Jedi would not let us live if they discovered we were delving into this kind of dark side research, Anakin. They would see it as a threat to their order and would move against us. Anakin, of course, believed this, the haunting vision of Obi-Wan cementing the fear that the Jedi could turn on him. And so Anakin asked the following, then what should we do, Chancellor? Palpatine stood up at this point, walking over to a large window that overlooked the bustling cityscape of Coruscant. Palpatine gazed out at the skyline, his expression one of deep contemplation. We need to neutralize the Jedi, Palpatine said, his tone matter of fact. If the Jedi are allowed to survive, they will discover our intentions and will stop us. I don't think I can help you open the portal with them standing in our way, Anakin. Anakin's heart pounded, fear gripping him. The vision of his own death at the hands of Obi-Wan was too real, too terrifying. And beyond that, this Anakin, who has not turned to the dark side, knows that neutralizing the entire order is definitely not the right thing to do. We can't go against the Jedi, he said. I had a vision of being attacked by a Jedi. I saw flames around me. If we act against the order in any way, that vision might become true and I will not be able to save Padmé. I can't risk it. We can't risk it. Hearing this, Palpatine pondered on Anakin's vision, his mind racing with possibilities. Palpatine, of course, knew that visions were potential futures, and Palpatine realized that he could use this vision of Anakin to turn Anakin away from the Jedi. And so, turning back to Anakin, Palpatine's expression softened with a calculated mixture of concern and reassurance. It is good that you told me about this vision, Anakin. It shows just how dangerous the Jedi truly are. They would turn on you so aggressively for simply exploring the dark side, for seeking to save the one you love. Anakin remained silent. Palpatine's words were not lies, based on everything Anakin knew at least. I will not let any harm come to you, Anakin. I will ensure that this vision does not come to pass. These words by Palpatine seemed to offer some degree of relief to Anakin, because despite his inner turmoil, Anakin trusted Palpatine and viewed him almost as a father figure. And Palpatine, sensing this trust in Anakin, pressed on. But Anakin, we must deal with the Jedi if we are to figure out a way to open the portal to save Padmé. If she dies, we need to be ready. Anakin tried to argue. There must be another way, we can't just... Palpatine cut him off, his tone urgent. But Grievous dead, Anakin, I will soon be forced to give up my emergency powers. We have very little time left to deal with the Jedi and to make it possible for us to be able to save Padmé. Anakin's frustration bubbled to the surface. How exactly are you going to deal with the Jedi? He demanded. Palpatine prepared to respond, but Anakin interjected. It's through the inhibitor chips, isn't it? Fice was right. The biochips in the clone army. They are there to turn the clones on the Jedi, to kill them all, aren't they? Anakin asked. Palpatine turned around, his expression shifting as he realized that General Skywalker had figured out his plan. There is no other way, Anakin. The Jedi Order needs to be destroyed for us to be able to help Padmé and prevent you from burning to death. Anakin stood up, his face contorted with anger. The Jedi do not deserve to be killed off, Anakin said, and Palpatine took a moment to reply to this. They are a regressive cult, Anakin. As you saw in your vision, they would not hesitate to kill one of their own in such a brutal manner. They kidnap children, Anakin, deny them a proper life, and forbid them from ever loving someone. Anakin, the Jedi are evil. Anakin hesitated. Palpatine's words resonated with some of his own frustrations with the Jedi Order. But then his resolve strengthened, and he said the following. You have no right to judge anyone, Sidious. You have manipulated the galaxy into a war that has killed millions. You orchestrated this entire conflict. You have no right to call anyone evil. At this point, Palpatine turned to Anakin, his eyes cold and calculating. With or without me, the war would have happened, Anakin. The Republic had been falling apart due to corruption for a long time, long before I even became a senator. What I did was merely accelerate an inevitable war that, had it occurred without my guidance, would have dragged on for decades and would have killed countless more. He then took a step closer to Anakin, his voice filled with conviction. By leading the charge from both fronts, I have saved billions of lives. And it is only because I am leading both fronts that this war has ended as quickly as it did. Without me, it would have gone on for much longer and would have claimed a lot more lives. But because of me, all it took were 3 standard years to end a galaxy-spanning conflict that had been brewing for years. And once the war ends, I will be able to take control over the entire galaxy. I have seen to that, Anakin. The clone forces would soon be answerable only to me. Most of the galaxy would actually prefer it. So trust me, Anakin. Anakin's expression darkened as he processed Palpatine's words. So you did all this to take control of the galaxy, not for peace. There can be no peace without strong leadership, Anakin. Without me, without us leading it, the galaxy would tear itself apart once more. If I do not take control, chaos will reign, and the suffering will again continue. And everything I did would have been for nothing. With the both of us in power, Anakin, we would do what the Jedi failed to do centuries ago. We will control the Outer Rim, and we would end slavery, Anakin. Something the Republic and the Jedi never did, even though they had the power to do so. Anakin fell silent. He had always believed that someone needed to make the politicians agree, to force them into action for the greater good. And he also did blame the Jedi Order and the Republic for letting people like him and his mother suffer in the Outer Rim. And because of that, Anakin found himself reluctantly agreeing with Palpatine's vision of a strong, centralized control. Yet, the idea of destroying the Jedi, his comrades and friends, felt fundamentally wrong to Anakin. So, side note, in the original timeline when Anakin went against the Jedi, he had made an impulsive decision to turn on Mace Windu. And everything else he did was also on impulse without thinking much. But that is not the case here. Here, Anakin has not turned to the dark side at this point, and his intentions are ultimately pure. And so Anakin said the following to Palpatine. There are alternatives to destroying the Jedi, he said, his voice resolute. You have the clones and the droids at your disposal, and you control the Republic's government. Instead of killing the Jedi, you can exile them to the Outer Rim. Bo-Katan of Mandalore will offer them refuge. Ahsoka is helping her rid Maul, your former apprentice, from Mandalore. She owes the Jedi. And then once the Jedi have been exiled, you can impose whatever restriction you want on them, but killing them is not right. Palpatine paused, his eyes narrowing as he considered Anakin's proposal. Anakin held his breath, watching Palpatine's face for any signs of a reaction. Palpatine then looked away, his mind processing what Anakin just shared. He could indeed exile the Jedi and keep them under control in the Outer Rim. He could prevent them from recruiting new initiates, effectively ensuring the Order's slow death. The thought of the Jedi helplessly watching from the fringes of the galaxy as the Chosen One stood by Palpatine's side was appealing, and as Palpatine thought on this, he felt that a slow death, rather than a swift one, held a certain dark allure. Moreover, with the Death Star's eventual completion, Palpatine realized he could eradicate the Jedi in one fell sweep if necessary, since after their exile they would be confined to one planet. So, all things considered, Palpatine realized that Anakin's plan was not bad. Further, Palpatine also knew that agreeing to this proposal would make Anakin trust him more. Trust that he would need to get Anakin to become his Sith apprentice. And having realized this, Palpatine said the following. "Very well, Anakin," he said slowly, his tone measured. "Since you are so forgiving of the Jedi, I will consider your proposal. The Jedi will be exiled to the Outer Rim. I will impose restrictions on their movements and actions." Anakin then let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The oppressive weight of the moment seemed to lift slightly, though the air still felt thick with tension. Palpatine's agreement was a temporary victory, a compromise that allowed Anakin to cling to his hope of saving Padmé without needing to exterminate the entire Order. And seeing this look on Anakin's face, Palpatine again spoke. "Remember, Anakin, I am doing this because of how much I value you. Your insights, your strength, your vision for the future, all of which will be necessary. Together we will reshape the galaxy into a place of peace and order. Peace and order that we will maintain." Anakin then looked at Palpatine, his eyes filled with one question at this point. "What now?" he asked. Palpatine smiled. "Now, Anakin, the war ends, and the Jedi leave, following which we will begin our work to unlock the secrets necessary to save Padmé. And to set all this in motion, all you need to do now, Anakin, is to inform the Council that I am Darth Sidious." Anakin's eyes widened in surprise. "Tell them you're a Sith?" he asked, a mix of confusion and concern evident in his tone. Palpatine raised a hand, his expression calm and reassuring. "Do not be concerned, Anakin. I have everything planned out. The Jedi, upon hearing who I am, will not wait for an explanation. They will try to destroy me, and by doing so they would have committed treason by attacking the Chancellor of the Republic. This will give me legal ammunition to activate the clones against the Order, following which I will order their exile. Trust me, Anakin, all will be fine." Anakin hesitated, the weight of Palpatine's words settling heavily on his shoulders. But soon he nodded slowly, preparing to carry out what needed to be done for Palpatine to be able to control the galaxy. "I will do it," he said, finally. "Good, Anakin. Go now. Inform the Council. Everything is falling into place. I promise you, Padmé and you will be safe." Having heard this, Anakin stood up. He then began walking away, and as he did so, he glanced back at Palpatine, who nodded encouragingly. "Trust in my plan, Anakin," Palpatine reiterated, his voice smooth and confident. And having heard this, Anakin again nodded and walked out of the office. As Anakin navigated through the grand halls of the Republic Executive Building, his thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear, hope, and determination. Meanwhile, Palpatine, back in his office, sat back down. The pieces were moving into place, and soon the Jedi would commit their treason, sealing their fate and solidifying his control over the galaxy. The evening light had begun to fade over Coruscant. So what would happen after this? Well, like in the original timeline, here too Anakin would inform the Jedi Council, mainly Mace Windu, that Darth Sidious is Palpatine, because this was Palpatine's plan all along in the original timeline as well. And upon receiving this news, Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, Saesee Tiin, and Agent Kolar would head on over to Palpatine's office. This would lead to a confrontation. Palpatine would quickly deal with three masters, but with Mace Windu he would struggle. Also, side note, as per the novelization for Revenge of the Sith and George Lucas's DVD commentary for Revenge of the Sith, Mace Windu actually does beat Palpatine fair and square in their lightsaber duel. But when it came to Force powers, Palpatine was holding back. And per the novelization, Palpatine's lightning was beginning to overpower Mace Windu's fate pad. So, according to the novelization, the reason Palpatine was holding back was to manipulate Anakin into siding against the Jedi. But in this timeline, since Anakin wouldn't be showing up to interfere in the confrontation between Mace Windu and Palpatine, Palpatine would opt for a different strategy to deal with Master Windu. And the strategy would be, right after the window is shattered, Palpatine would jump back, and after finding an opening, would push Mace Windu out the shattered window. And following this, Palpatine would have gained the legal ammunition to execute Order 66. Anyways, Palpatine would soon walk over to his desk and activate his HoloNet transceiver. And then he would record a transmission to be sent out to every single clone trooper. In this transmission, he would say the following: execute Order 66 using non-lethal force. And then he would send out this transmission to every single clone trooper. And this would activate Order 66. But, unlike in the original timeline, here the clones would not kill the Jedi. Instead, they would detain them. And the only Jedi to escape this detainment operation would be Master Yoda, who would soon enough make his way over to Coruscant, to the Jedi Temple. But as for Obi-Wan, since in this timeline he wouldn't be shot at, because the clones wanted to take him in alive, Cody would tell Obi-Wan to come back down to the ground. He would do so, at which point all the clones would surround Obi-Wan and hit him with stun blasts, detaining him. And following this, once the Jedi had been detained, Palpatine would also slip in the location of the Separatist leaders to the clone forces, telling the clones to destroy the Separatist leaders. So the reason why Palpatine would not send Anakin to Mustafar in this timeline would be because of Anakin's vision of dying a fiery death, because Mustafar is on fire almost always, and because of that, Palpatine decides to not send him there, because he wouldn't want the apprentice he'd been manipulating for 13 years to somehow be damaged. And so, in this timeline, the clones would destroy the Separatist leaders, following which the droid army would be deactivated, and the war would officially come to an end. And as soon as this happens, Palpatine would go before the Senate and explain to them how the war is over and how the Jedi tried to commit treason by turning on him, following which he would again, just like in the original timeline, create the Galactic Empire. Meanwhile, Yoda would arrive on Coruscant, but this time alone, without Obi-Wan. But Yoda would not be deterred, and again he would try to defeat Sidious. And he would fail again in this timeline, because in this timeline, Sidious is even less damaged than he was in the original timeline. And so Yoda would again go into exile. But here, the exile would not go like in the original timeline. But before we get to that, after the war ends, like he promised Anakin, Sidious would order the Jedi to be exiled. And just like Anakin predicted, Bo-Katan Kryze would offer refuge to the Jedi, because the Mandalorians have a strong sense of honor, and Bo-Katan still saw Ahsoka as a Jedi when she helped them get rid of Maul. And so, Bo-Katan would offer them refuge, but not purely out of the kindness of her heart. She had her own plans. Mandalorian Jedi were an interesting prospect for her. And so, after Anakin makes the request, Bo-Katan agrees, and soon enough, the Jedi were gone from Coruscant because they really didn't have a choice. The war was over, most of the clones were on Coruscant, and fighting all the clones were impractical. And also, Palpatine had successfully turned the Republic's view on the Jedi to a negative one. Most of the galaxy believed they were traitors, and realizing the predicament, they have no choice but to leave Coruscant, and their home of 25,000 years. As for Anakin, as all this was happening, he did not bother facing Obi-Wan, both because he was somewhat ashamed for having done this to the Jedi, and also because of what he saw in the vision. He knows that Obi-Wan would not hesitate to give him a very terrible end. So Anakin mostly stayed hidden from the public eye as all this was happening. But anyways, after the war was over and the Jedi left Coruscant, Anakin again went to Palpatine, telling Palpatine to hold up his end of the deal. And Palpatine agreed. Palpatine soon moved his official residence to the temple, and him and Anakin began going through the Jedi archives, mostly the hidden section. But as they were doing their investigation, Padmé went into labor, and Luke and Leia were born without incident, and Padmé did not die. Anakin wondered how this happened, and he confronted Palpatine. And Palpatine told Anakin that the reason Padmé stayed alive was because of the path that Anakin took, because he took the right one. His visions of himself burning and Padmé dying were from a timeline where Anakin made the wrong choices. Palpatine would convince Anakin of this. He had no choice but to believe Palpatine, because he had already destroyed the Jedi Order to make all this happen. And as for Anakin's desire to destroy Palpatine and take over the galaxy himself, well, that wouldn't really be happening in this timeline, because Anakin never really turned to the dark side here. He just made a series of logical choices based on the information that he had. And by this point, with Padmé and his children surviving, Anakin would come to believe that he made the right choices, and that siding with Palpatine and doing what he did was the right path. And further, to keep Anakin distracted, Palpatine would declare before the galaxy that Anakin Skywalker was the only Jedi that did not turn on him, and that from now on, Anakin speaks with the Emperor's voice, and that his command is that of the Emperor's. Everyone would hear this, including the Jedi on Mandalore. And following this, having received his newfound power, Anakin would decide to make all his childhood dreams come true. One of them being the eradication of slavery and going back to Tatooine to free all his friends. And he would do just that. Anakin would pretty much invade the Outer Rim, the Hutt space, and mainly Tatooine, killing all the Hutts and freeing the slaves. And eventually Anakin would come to believe that all of this is possible only because of Palpatine, and this would increase Anakin's loyalty towards Palpatine. And as for Palpatine himself, he still had to turn Anakin to the dark side, which is why he was sending Anakin on these missions to the Outer Rim, because Palpatine knew that Anakin would act out against the Hutts and the slavers out of anger, pulling Anakin closer to the dark side. And it was only a matter of time before Anakin fully submitted himself to his dark teachings, Palpatine realized. He had even thought up a good name to give Anakin when he finally agreed to be his apprentice. And as for Anakin's relationship with Padmé, well, it would be rocky to say the least, because they disagree at a fundamental level on governance. This was evident in their interaction from Attack of the Clones, where Anakin tells Padmé that politicians should sometimes be made to agree, which Padmé heavily disagreed on. But despite these ideological differences, they would be fine. As for Luke and Leia, they would grow up on Naboo, not on Coruscant, and as they grew older, Anakin would instruct them in the ways of the Force, both the dark and light sides, and the twins would grow up to be powerful Force users. But they would also be influenced by Padmé and her view of the galaxy, so they wouldn't be clones of Anakin. And as for the Jedi Order, now stranded on Mandalore, under the strict monitoring of the Empire, well, they would struggle. But Bo-Katan would try to integrate them into Mandalorian culture, because she didn't do everything she did for nothing. She did expect a return, which she would eventually get, because there were Force-sensitive Mandalorians, and while the Empire did try to monitor everything closely, some things just slipped past, and the Jedi Order wouldn't stay as dead as Palpatine hoped. And as for Master Yoda, in this timeline, even though he wanted to go into exile, Bail Organa and Obi-Wan would convince him to come to Mandalore, so that he may guide them. And since there is no Luke or Leia to train, Yoda would come to see that going to die on Dagobah would be pointless. And so Yoda would also join the other Jedi on Mandalore. Meanwhile, Ahsoka, after finding that Anakin is now the second in command of the Empire, well, she would go to Coruscant to meet with Anakin. Because, side note, even in Rebels, when she finds him as Vader, Ahsoka tells him that she would not leave him. So in this timeline as well, Ahsoka would go to Anakin, and she would become his close confidant and his second in command. And after some convincing by Anakin, she would come to see that this new Empire had its merits, especially since none of the Jedi died here. Also, Mace Windu in this timeline doesn't die, so he too would end up on Mandalore. And so that is how the galaxy would progress in this timeline. And as for Palpatine, just like in the original timeline, after having gained power, he would not be too interested in governance. He would leave that to Anakin, and Anakin to Ahsoka, basically. And Palpatine would pretty much confine himself to the Jedi Temple, spending all his time researching into the Force. And that is how things would go in this timeline. The Jedi Order would be exiled to Mandalore, Palpatine would be researching into the Force, and Anakin would essentially have inherited the galaxy. Also, the Death Star would still be under construction in this timeline, and it would be ready soon. So what do you think would happen after this? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I would like to thank CJ Russell, Lord Newt, Rufus Nelson IV, and Rashid for supporting me on Patreon. And if you too are interested in supporting the channel for $1 or more a month, do check out my Patreon, link is in the description, I think, and goodbye. Also, do check out the shop if you're in the market for a t-shirt or a cap or something. I think I have a few in there. Anyways, goodbye, and may Master Yoda always be with you.